get it. So I'm going to start out the same way. I'm not going to talk so much about this. I'm just going to do it. So if you have questions, ask me, because otherwise I'll just go ahead and throw a cylinder so I can start to shape it for you. Pushing down, pulling in when I do that. And that's what makes the middle go up. Once I get to the top, I'm just going to lock my hands until that's nice and in center. I'm going to start pushing it back down. Elbows still braced. Perfect. Ow. That's right on that bruise. This stuff is in center, this is not yet in center. So a lot of times, see, this hand is actually, it's not all the way down there, because that's just sort of making my hand move. I move my hand up like that and I'm pushing down, because I'm pushing down mostly with this hand. So that hand's just holding in the side. And then as the ball gets bigger, I'm incorporating more and more and more of this thing. I wish I could get rid of the whine on that wheel. I can't figure out why it's whining. Now look at it. Okay. It's in center. I'm going to open it. I like this thumb to ride on the clay when I open it, because if I don't, then I'm going to get a really sharp edge that pulls up. So when that, it both guides my hand and supports the hand that's actually doing the opening, but it's also keeping that sharp edge for me. I'm going down first. See how far down I am? Then I'm going to pull back. Just enough so I can get my hand in there. How far you pull back has to do with what you're making. You know, if you want a narrow bottom piece, don't pull back very far. If you want it to be really wide and short, then pull back a long way. Now I'm going to make my ridge. This is the part where I think some of you are kind of sliding through it. You need to make sure your outside hand is at the very, is on the wheel head, starting that ridge. You can see the ridge I started is right at the very bottom, and that your inside hand is starting its ridge there before you start to pull up. If you don't have those ridges, slow down and sort of consciously make those. Up here I'm slowing down, I'm easing up on my pressure so that my hand isn't slowing down, but my pressure is backing off a little bit, because I'm pushing the whole ball of clay around down here, and up here I don't have as much clay to move around. Okay, squeezing my ridge, lifting it up. All the way up to the top, and then I'm easing my hands off. When you're shaping a cylinder, throw it for thinness first. So right now I'm doing just like I did before. I'm just throwing a straight cylinder. If you go for shape first, you won't be able to thin it out. You'll get some really pretty shape and go, oh, I love that. And you won't want it, you won't want to do any more work on it, so then it'll weigh a ton. So make it thin first. Somebody told me, these are all from great potters here and there said that you ought to be able to get to at least the thinness of your shape in 3 pulls, which seems impossible when you're starting out. This is already 3, maybe 4. I'm going to do 1 more, but you shouldn't need to do pull after pull after pull. So if you're doing 8 or 10 pulls on your cylinder and nothing much is changing, you've got to change something. You've got to press harder, you've got to move faster, or use more clay or something like that. But it's not going to really do you any good to keep pulling. All the time you're doing that, water's soaking into the clay, it's getting wetter and softer, and it's going to be less likely to get tall if you do that. So that is really important. So, first of all, I've sort of already made, I guess I'll talk about a, what is that, concave cylinder, because I've already made one. If I want to shape that even more, I can color it in more. So I can really make that pretty dramatic. I can use the curved side of my rib. Since the curve is going inside, I want a rib that's curved to match. So I can use that to work on that curve. Of course, you don't have to make necessarily all one continuous curve. The nice thing, by the way, about using a rib is that it often compresses a little the moisture out of the clay. It'll make it a little bit drier so that you can work with a little longer. Be really careful when you take that stuff off, because you can cut yourself. I think I already said that on that edge there. So that's basically a concave pot. And I could do that quite dramatically if I wanted to. I'm not going to do it too much because I want to reverse it and go the other direction. But you can see I just keep coloring in here. I start below and go after, you know, so that I have a nice continuous curve. But I can get that to go in quite a bit. Now, if I want to make a convex pot, then I'm going to bring it back into a cylinder, which means I'm going to bring this up. Oops, it's a little dry there. Ever feel that friction between your hand and the clay, stop and put some water on it. So I'm going to bring that in, and I'm just going to push this back out again. And I'm literally just pushing against it with my straight finger. Some people use ribs to do that. Oh, it's still a little thick down there. But now, what all I'm going to do is just continue that process. I'm going to probably go back to using these fingers, so I'm just going to gently push where I want it to go out. It's a pretty logical way to work. There isn't like a hidden technique here. I'm just pushing in the places where I want my pot to go out, and then easing up on it where I want it to come back in. And again, if I did that enough, I could make that pretty dramatic.
You have to bring it all the way up like every time if you're just working in the middle, like you still pull all the way up.
No,
okay.
no, you can't just work in the middle. Yeah, and that's a really good question. No, I just work on it where I'm at. I sometimes go all the way up just because I want that. I'm working on making that a nice continuous curve. I've got a little more clay down here than I want, and it's getting a little bit wet. So I'm going to go ahead and cut this off now, even though I'm going to keep shaping this. So I'm using this pointy part of my tool. A lot of people use those wooden pointy sticks that you have in your toolkit. I just never learned how to do that with those. I just can't do it with those. I learned how to do it with a rib like this, so by golly, that's what I'm going to use. But a lot of potters I see use those pointy sticks. So feel free to experiment with that. Anyway, I'm just taking, again, it's easier to do it now. If I wait until, I forgot to trim, I'll do that in a second. If I wait until I trim the pot, it's just harder. So anything that you can do while the pot is on the wheel is definitely preferable. So let's just push this as far as we can. Maybe not as far as we can. There was a guy who was a couple years ahead of me at Bethany, who was a really good potter. He's still a potter in Seattle, Washington. And he made this beautiful pot. It's like a perfectly round pot. I just loved that pot, and I finally talked him into selling it to me. So I still have it. It was just so beautiful and round. So when you do a lot of coloring, changing, this had a little air bubble in it, so the rim was a little off center anyway. But when you're doing a lot of coloring, especially when you're bringing it in, the top edge will often get off center because it doesn't really like to be pushed back in like that. So I'm just going to trim that off. See how slowly I did that? Carefully. It does help if your pot's in center. Sort of fix that edge. I'll work on that some more. But again, I want to do that, especially if I was going to make that rim flare way out. You want to polish the rim while it's fairly upright, because it's really hard to do it when it's out, sort of vertical. So another thing to caution you about is to keep the water out of the bottom of the pot. I keep putting it in there, but I keep pulling it back out again, because if I leave it in there, the water's just going to be soaking into the bottom, and eventually I have seen it happen where the water just soaks in and the pot just collapses, like hours after you've thrown it, which is not a fun thing to do. I could also use the flexible scraper with this. That one of the nicest things about this is that if I bend it like that, I get a curve that sort of matches this curve right here. When you use the straight side, but you bend it with your thumb. So I'm pushing with my fingers and my thumb is holding in the middle. I'm getting a nice continuous curve. So that way I can really refine that curve in a great way. I was going to push that more, wasn't I? Anyway, that's basically what I'm doing. I don't often use the rib inside a pot. You can, but it takes a little bit of practice. I'd want to use a much smaller rib in there. My little red rib right now. I've got a really small rib that I could use on the inside, but usually I don't do that because it's just too easy for it to get hung up on the rest of the pot. What else? Oh, right. The only other thing I think I need to talk about is when you're making a curve, you don't want the shoulder to get too horizontal. As soon as it gets horizontal, it's going to want to collapse. So you can get a slant that's pretty close to horizontal, but you don't want it to be completely horizontal. If you do really want to do that, you probably are going to have to make the pot, let it dry a little bit, maybe force it dry with a hair dryer, and really work at it when it's very, very dry, or it's not going to be able to handle that. Any questions about any of that? Okay, that's basically all I've got. I'm going to finish this and take it off. Oh, right, and then I want to demonstrate trimming, so I'll do that real quickly. Let me get this off the wheel and then I'll trim it. Let's see, we'll just give it a little flared top at the top there. Okay, so you can stop that one.